5 of the country's top doctors looked a billionaire in the eye and told him there was nothing more to do, that his 7-year-old son had a rare aggressive cancer and only 2 months left to live. No treatment would work. No surgery was possible. They said to prepare for the end. But while the world gave up on that little boy, one person didn't. She wasn't a doctor. She wasn't famous. She was the housekeeper. And what she discovered, alone, without support, without a degree, didn't just prove the experts wrong. She not only saved the boy's life, but also uncovered something that had been sitting right under their noses the entire time. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that Ethan was only 7 years old when doctors gave him the worst possible news. He had a rare type of cancer that had spread through his trachea and lungs. Because of the tumor's location and severity, Ethan couldn't speak clearly anymore. His breathing was heavy and slow, and he often coughed or gasped for air. He was no longer able to walk on his own, so he used a wheelchair most of the time. His body was weak and he needed help with almost everything. His father, Marcus Blackwood, a very rich man known for his success in real estate, didn't waste time. He immediately arranged for Ethan to be seen by the 5 most respected cancer doctors in the country. Each one ran tests and reviewed scans, but every single doctor came back with the same conclusion. Ethan's cancer could not be removed, could not be treated, and he had 2 months left to live. Marcus couldn't believe it. He had already lost the love of his life when Ethan was born. His wife died during childbirth, and since then he had focused all his energy on raising Ethan the best way he could. Hearing that his son was going to die made everything collapse around him. For a man who could buy almost anything in the world, this was something he couldn't fix with money. He begged the doctors to try experimental treatments, to contact hospitals overseas, or to explore any solution that hadn't been tested yet. But the answer was always the same. Nothing could be done. The cancer was too advanced, and it was in a place that was too dangerous to operate. Medicine wouldn't help. Radiation wouldn't help. They all gently told him to prepare for the end. They advised him to enjoy the remaining time with Ethan, to make it meaningful. The doctors explained things clearly. The cancer had wrapped itself around the windpipe and filled parts of the lungs. Even if they tried surgery, they would risk killing Ethan on the operating table. Any attempt to remove the tumor would damage his ability to breathe completely, and no known drug had any effect on this kind of aggressive cancer. Marcus sat in silence while listening to these explanations. He watched as Ethan struggled to lift a cup or push the buttons on the remote control. The boy, who once ran around the house laughing, was now unable to play or talk like he used to. He slept most of the day and was often in pain. Sometimes he cried, not because he was scared, but because he didn't understand why he couldn't get better. Marcus felt helpless. He didn't know what to say to his son or how to deal with the idea that he might soon be gone forever. Even the nurses and hospital staff had a sad but kind tone when speaking to Marcus. They had seen cases like this before. They knew when a child's condition was beyond saving. Some even gave advice on how to prepare emotionally, what support groups to join, and how to explain things to young children in gentle ways. One of them told Marcus about a hospice program where Ethan could stay at home during his last weeks, surrounded by familiar things. Marcus nodded, thanked them, and took every brochure they offered. But deep inside he wasn't ready to say goodbye. Every time he looked at Ethan's pale face or heard his slow breathing during the night, it felt like a countdown had already started. The house that used to feel warm and full of joy now felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the end of something precious. Some relatives and friends visited to show support. They brought small gifts for Ethan and tried to cheer him up, but the atmosphere was heavy. No one knew what to say. Marcus avoided talking about the future. Instead, he focused on the moment, helping Ethan eat, adjusting his oxygen tube, sitting beside him while he watched cartoons. The two of them had quiet days, sometimes filled with silence, sometimes filled with short conversations when Ethan had the energy. There were moments when Marcus smiled at his son's small jokes, or held his hand tightly when Ethan's breathing got worse. The idea that this life, this connection, was going to disappear soon made Marcus feel like he was drowning in sadness. But still, he stayed strong in front of Ethan. He didn't cry where the boy could see. He always tried to smile, even when everything felt broken inside. But not everyone in the house had given up. There was someone or something that didn't accept this future. It might have been a person or a presence, or maybe a force driven by love, denial, or stubborn hope. While the doctors focused on what medicine could do, and while Marcus faced his grief and tried to be present for his son, this presence began to take action. Somewhere in that quiet home, plans were being made. Something or someone still believed there was a way to change what everyone else had already accepted. It didn't matter how small the chance was or how impossible the situation looked. This presence refused to let Ethan's story end this way. While everyone talked about time running out, this part of the house was still fighting, silently preparing for what would come next. A fight against the final diagnosis. Sophia had been working as the housekeeper in the Blackwood estate for almost 3 years. She was quiet, calm, and always respectful. Most of the time, the family barely noticed her presence. She didn't speak unless someone asked her something directly, but every day she was the one who stayed close to Ethan. She was there from the early morning until late at night. She brought his juices in small cups with colorful straws, gave him his daily baths with warm water, prepared his medication at the right time, and helped him get into bed carefully so he wouldn't be in pain. Ethan had grown attached to her. He didn't see her just as a housekeeper. To him, she was his second mom. When the nights were hard and the pain made him scared, it was Sophia who stayed beside him, holding his hand, listening to his quiet crying, and whispering comforting words in his ear. She never tried to take the place of his real mother. She knew that was not her role, but Ethan had never known his mom since she passed away the day he was born. Sophia had filled a space in his life without even trying. She just did what needed to be done. She never left him alone during the hardest days. When he felt sick, it was Sophia who cleaned up the mess, wiped his face, and made sure he was okay. She didn't flinch or complain. She sat beside him when he watched cartoons, even if he fell asleep halfway through the show. She read him stories, even when he didn't answer back. She stayed silent most of the time, but her presence was steady, and Ethan trusted her deeply. He would look for her first when he woke up. For him, Sophia wasn't just staff. She was family, even if the rest of the house didn't see it that way. Sophia had a deep reason for acting the way she did. Years ago, she had a daughter. Her name was Isabella, a sweet and happy girl who loved singing and playing with toy animals. But one day, Isabella got sick. It seemed like a simple fever at first, and the doctor said it was nothing serious. They gave her basic medicine and told Sophia to let her rest. But things got worse quickly. Sophia begged the doctors to run more tests, but no one listened. By the time they found the real problem, it was too late. Her daughter died from a condition that could have been treated if caught early. The pain of losing her was something Sophia never forgot. After that, she made a decision. She would never again trust words alone. She would learn everything she could. How to read medical tests, how to understand symptoms, how to hear between the lines of what doctors said. She didn't go to medical school, but she became an expert in her own way. Sophia spent her nights reading online about diseases, medicines, symptoms, and treatments. She watched interviews with doctors, read medical papers, and studied every report that passed through the house. Whenever Ethan had an appointment, Sophia listened carefully, even when no one was talking to her directly. She watched the doctors' faces, how they spoke, and how they avoided questions. She paid attention to Ethan's reactions too. She knew every cough, every wheeze, every moment when his breathing changed. And little by little, a strange feeling started growing inside her. Something didn't make sense. She had seen people dying before. She had seen how fast it usually happened, how the body would show signs of giving up. But Ethan didn't seem like that. Despite everything, he smiled. He talked about the future. He wanted to play. He didn't act like someone who was dying. Every day, Sophia saw something that the doctors had missed. The boy had energy sometimes, even if only for a few minutes. His eyes were bright. He didn't seem like someone who only had weeks left to live. Of course he was sick. There was no doubt about that. But there was something about the way he reacted to the world around him. The light in his face, the way he laughed when something funny happened on TV, the way he tried to joke with her when she gave him medicine, it didn't fit the image of a terminal case. She started going back over every test result she had seen. She reviewed the names of the medications. She checked side effects and compared timelines. She stayed up at night looking for other possibilities. The doubt in her heart was getting stronger. What if the doctors were wrong? What if Ethan's diagnosis wasn't the end? Sophia didn't want to believe in false hope. She didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep. But as the days passed, the doubt became a real thought, and that thought slowly turned into a quiet belief. Maybe there was something missing in the diagnosis. Maybe they overlooked something. Or maybe there was a different condition that looked the same but had a different treatment. Sophia didn't know what the answer was, but she knew one thing clearly. She had seen death before, and this wasn't it. Ethan was fighting. His body was weak, but his spirit was strong. He still dreamed. He still had joy. And now Sophia couldn't ignore what she felt. The same pain that once broke her was now pushing her to act. The woman who had been silent for so long was beginning to see something no one else did. The doubt in her heart was turning into certainty. It was a rainy afternoon. The sky was grey and the sound of water hitting the windows filled the room. Inside, Ethan was lying on his bed feeling tired as usual. Sophia sat next to him with a small portable ultrasound machine. She had started using it to help relax the muscles in his neck and chest. It was a way to comfort him and check if anything felt different. As she moved the device slowly over his skin, Ethan looked at her. His eyes were wet, not from pain, but from something deeper. Then, in a quiet voice, he asked, "Am I going to live, Mommy?" Sophia froze. Her heart sank. That sentence came out of nowhere, soft but heavy. It was the same question he had asked his father a few days earlier, a question that had gone unanswered. But now, hearing it again directly from his lips, Sophia couldn't stay still. Her hand started shaking. Sophia tried to stay calm. She didn't want Ethan to see that his words had shaken her. But inside she was falling apart. She gently placed her other hand on his chest to steady herself, then looked at the screen of the ultrasound machine. As she moved the probe slightly to the left, something on the monitor caught her attention. There was a dark shape on the image. It didn't look like what she had seen in the previous scans. This wasn't part of the tumor described in the medical reports. It looked too small and too specific, almost like it was in a separate area. Sophia narrowed her eyes and focused, trying to trace its size and shape. She moved the probe back and forth. It was clearly there. She had gone over Ethan's files many times. This wasn't on any of them. What was this? Her heart beat faster, but she tried not to show it. At that exact moment, Marcus walked into the room. He had just returned from a call with one of the doctors. He wasn't expecting anything unusual, just another quiet moment with his son. But as he stepped in, he heard the last words from Ethan's mouth. "Am I going to live, Mommy?" Marcus froze in place. His hands dropped to his sides. He felt like all the air had left his body. For a second he didn't move or speak. His eyes slowly filled with tears, but he didn't make a sound. He just stood there and looked at his son, who had no idea how deeply that question had cut both adults in the room. Marcus had no answer. The last time Ethan asked him that, he just stayed quiet. He couldn't lie to his son, but he also couldn't tell him the truth. That silence had stayed with him for days. Now it was happening again. Sophia knew she had to speak. She couldn't let the boy go through another moment of silence. She looked at Ethan, then at Marcus, then back at the monitor. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes quickly, and spoke in a quiet, steady voice. "You will, my love," she said. "Mommy number 2 will find out how." Her words were soft but full of certainty. Marcus looked at her, surprised. She had never made such a bold promise before, but she wasn't just saying it to comfort the child. Sophia meant it. She pointed at the screen and showed Marcus the image. "Look," she said. "This wasn't in the reports. It's new, or maybe it was missed." Marcus walked closer and looked. He didn't understand much about ultrasounds, but he trusted Sophia's judgment. She had spent more time with Ethan than anyone. If she saw something strange, it meant something. For the first time, Marcus saw a tiny flicker of hope. The room stayed quiet, but the mood had changed. Sophia saved the ultrasound image and wrote down some notes on a piece of paper. She wanted to compare it with the old files again. Maybe the doctors hadn't seen this area. Maybe they had used a different angle. Or maybe the tumor wasn't what they thought it was. There was now a real reason to look deeper. Sophia didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she felt something different in her chest. A strong instinct. She had ignored it once in her life, and it had cost her daughter. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and held Ethan's hand. He didn't speak, but this time his silence didn't feel like fear. It felt like he was finally seeing a small light in the middle of all the darkness. The boy smiled weakly, unaware of what had just changed. Sophia turned off the ultrasound machine and placed it on the table. She gently helped Ethan lie back, fixed his blanket, and kissed his forehead. He looked calmer now, like her answer had brought him peace, even if just for a moment. Marcus stayed close, his eyes still on the monitor, his mind racing. Sophia turned to him and said, "I want to send this to someone. Not one of your doctors, someone else." Marcus didn't argue. He nodded. If Sophia believed there was something worth looking into, he would support it. The rain outside continued, steady and quiet, but something inside that room had shifted. A sentence that could have broken everyone had instead sparked a new question. What if they were wrong? What if Ethan's case wasn't what the report said? Sophia looked at the boy one more time and repeated with even more certainty, "You will, my love. Mommy number 2 will figure it out." She had printed the most recent medical report for Ethan and placed it side by side with her notes. Next to them was the video she had recorded earlier using the portable ultrasound machine. On her laptop screen, the pause frame clearly showed the shape she had seen, a strange round mass located right next to the trachea cartilage. She zoomed in and studied it carefully. According to the doctor's reports, the tumor was supposed to be diffuse and spread throughout the airway and lungs with no clear borders. But this image didn't match that description. What she was seeing looked like one single lump, very defined, sitting in one place. Something wasn't right. She had spent years studying medical patterns on her own, and this didn't fit the typical profile of the kind of cancer the doctors had described. It felt wrong. Sophia didn't waste time. She carefully copied the video to a USB drive and printed some screenshots from the ultrasound. She remembered someone who might help, Dr. Benjamin Harris, a retired physician who had been a close friend of her late sister. He used to be a respected doctor in his day, and even after retirement, he still read medical journals and followed unusual cases for his own interest. Sophia called him early in the morning and asked if she could visit. She didn't tell him everything over the phone, just said it was urgent and about a child. When she arrived at his suburban home later that day, he greeted her warmly and invited her in. They sat at the dining table. Sophia pulled out her materials and explained what she had seen. Then she handed him the USB drive so he could view the video. Dr. Harris plugged it into his laptop and started watching closely. He didn't speak for a long time. He watched the video once, then played it again. He zoomed in, adjusted the contrast, and rewound it. His face was serious the entire time. Sophia sat across the table, her hands clenched. Her heart was racing. After a few more minutes, he finally stopped the video and looked at her. "Sophia," he said slowly, "this doesn't look like a tumor." She blinked in confusion. "What?" she asked. "This is not cancer," he repeated. "It looks like a calcified infection. A rare one, yes, but not cancer. I've seen this before in 1 or 2 cases years ago." Sophia couldn't believe what she was hearing. She leaned forward. "Can it be treated?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes. If this is what I think it is, it can be removed surgically. It's a tricky procedure, but nowhere near as dangerous as what those doctors described. This isn't terminal, Sophia. It's curable." Her whole body felt cold and warm at the same time. She had expected some doubts, maybe more questions, but not this. Not a complete reversal of everything the top 5 doctors in the country had said. She asked him again, just to be sure. "Are you saying they got it wrong?" He nodded again. "I believe they misread the scans. The signs are similar, especially if they're looking for a tumor, but this shape, the location, the consistency, it fits more with a calcified granuloma. It's rare, but not unheard of." Sophia remembered all the medical terms from her nights of reading. This one she had never come across before. She asked him what it meant in simple terms. "It means," he said, "that it's an infection your body tried to seal off and it became hard like stone, but it's not cancer. It doesn't spread, and yes, it can be removed." Her eyes filled with tears. All this time, everyone believed that Ethan was dying. The top specialists had told his father to prepare for the worst. They had looked at the same area and called it inoperable, terminal, hopeless. But this man, sitting in a quiet house with no clinic, no fancy machines, had seen the truth. She stood up and began pacing. "What do I do now?" she asked. Dr. Harris leaned back and thought. "You'll need to take this to someone who listens. A surgeon, maybe someone who still remembers how to think outside the box and bring your evidence." "All of it," Sophia nodded quickly. She already knew where to start. Marcus had money, power, and contacts. If she showed him this and explained it clearly, he might believe her. He had to. This wasn't just a guess. It was proof. Real, visible, undeniable proof. With new hope burning inside her, Sophia packed everything carefully. She made digital copies of the video and printed more images. She planned how to present it step by step. First to Marcus, then to another specialist for a second opinion. She wasn't a doctor, and she knew that, but what she had seen and what Dr. Harris had confirmed couldn't be ignored. Ethan didn't have to die. That sentence repeated in her mind over and over. It gave her strength. She didn't sleep that night. She stayed awake organizing files, writing notes, and preparing to face anyone who would question her. For the first time in months, she felt something close to relief. Not because the fight was over, but because now there was a real chance to win. She looked one last time at the image from the ultrasound, the one that changed everything. Now she just needed to prove it to the world. Sophia arrived at the Metropolitan Medical Center early in the morning. She had everything with her. The video from the portable ultrasound, printed images, and a written report comparing Ethan's diagnosis with the findings from Dr. Harris. Her hands were shaking, but she was determined. She asked to speak to one of the doctors responsible for Ethan's case. After waiting for over an hour in the hallway, she was called into a room. The doctor barely looked at her before she started explaining. She pointed at the images and described the differences. She mentioned the possibility of a misdiagnosis and said it might not be cancer at all. The doctor interrupted her. His face turned serious, but not in a respectful way. He looked annoyed. Then he said, "With all due respect, you clean floors. We went to medical school." Another doctor laughed quietly in the corner. Sophia felt humiliated, but she didn't back down. She repeated her words again. She went to a second doctor, then a third. The response was always the same. They dismissed her before even looking at the evidence. One doctor said she had probably misunderstood what she saw. Another said, if it were that simple, real professionals would have caught it. No one took her seriously. She was just the housekeeper in their eyes, not someone who could challenge a team of top specialists. One even accused her of creating confusion that could hurt the family emotionally. Sophia felt her chest burn with frustration. She didn't want attention. She didn't want credit. She just wanted someone to take a serious look. But the walls of the hospital were thick, and so were the egos. With every rejection, her anger grew. But more than that, her fear grew too. Ethan was getting worse. His energy was lower each day. He was eating less, breathing slower. Sophia knew time was running out. She tried reaching Marcus at home, but this time it wasn't that simple. She was told he wasn't available. When she insisted, she was stopped by the family's lawyers. They said she was creating false hope and that what she was doing was dangerous. One of them warned that if she continued interfering with medical decisions, she could be removed from the house entirely. Sophia felt trapped. She had lived in that house for almost 3 years. She had taken care of Ethan every single day. Now, when she had something that could save his life, they were shutting her out. She went back to her room that night and cried, but not because of the insults or the way they treated her. She cried because Ethan didn't have time to wait for them to open their eyes. He needed help now. She sat up in bed, wiped her face, and decided that if they wouldn't help, she would find someone who would. She stayed up all night searching online. She looked for doctors who had experience with rare conditions in children. She typed in keywords related to misdiagnosis, trachea infections, and surgical corrections. After hours of searching, she found a name, Dr. Samuel Mitchell. He was a world-renowned pediatric diagnostician, known for reviewing difficult cases and spotting errors others missed. He had worked with hospitals in several countries and had published books on rare diseases. Most people would never have direct access to someone like him. But Sophia didn't let that stop her. She found an old email address from a medical article and sent a message. In the email she explained everything. She attached the video, screenshots, and her notes. She told him about Ethan's story, the hospital's rejection, and the timeline. She asked for help, not as a doctor, but as someone who had nothing else to try. Then she waited, heart racing, hoping for a miracle. Days later, Sophia received a reply. It was short but clear. "Send the boy immediately." That was all it said. But for her, it was everything. She printed the message and ran to the house. She asked to speak to Marcus again. This time she didn't accept being pushed away. She waited by the hallway for over an hour until he finally walked in. He looked tired, emotionally worn down, like a man carrying more than he could handle. Sophia handed him the paper and said, "Please read this." He read it silently. Then he looked at her. "Who is this doctor?" he asked. She explained everything she had learned about Dr. Mitchell. Marcus didn't respond right away. His face was unsure. He had trusted the best doctors in the country. But then Sophia said, "Just look at Ethan's eyes. He still wants to live." Marcus didn't speak, but he turned to walk upstairs. Later that night, Marcus went to Ethan's room. The boy was awake barely, but his eyes opened when his father entered. Marcus sat next to him. Ethan didn't say much, just smiled weakly. Then he whispered, "Did the second mom find something?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Yes," he said. "She did." The next day the house was busy. Bags were packed. Medical records were printed. Tickets were booked. Marcus had made his choice. They were flying out to meet Dr. Mitchell. It was risky, but it was also their only chance. Sophia stood near the door, watching the boy being carried carefully into the car. She felt a deep weight lift from her shoulders. This wasn't the end, not yet. It might be the last chance they had. Or maybe it was the first real chance. The start of something that no one had believed possible except her. The trip was kept completely secret. Marcus didn't want anyone from the press or hospital finding out. He contacted a private aviation company and chartered a jet for the next morning. Only a small group knew about the flight. Just Marcus, Sophia, Ethan, and 2 medical professionals hired to provide support during the journey. Everything was done quietly. The staff at the house was told the family was taking time away. Marcus didn't explain further. Sophia packed a small bag for herself and helped pack Ethan's things. They brought medications, oxygen supplies, and all medical documents, including Sophia's video and the message from Dr. Mitchell. On the plane, Ethan was tired but excited. He asked if this trip would help him get better. Sophia smiled and said yes. Marcus sat quietly holding a folder with all the test results. The flight was long but calm. When they landed, a car was waiting to take them straight to the clinic. The clinic was located in a quiet area outside the city. It was modern and clean, but not huge like the hospitals back home. Dr. Mitchell met them at the entrance. He didn't wear a white coat, just a simple shirt and jeans. He shook Marcus's hand, greeted Sophia with respect, and leaned down to speak kindly to Ethan. Then he got straight to work. Within an hour, new tests had started. They used more advanced scanning machines, more precise imaging, and a complete blood panel. Everything was fast but organized. Sophia watched every step carefully. Marcus stayed close to Ethan the whole time. That evening, Dr. Mitchell returned with the results. He didn't hesitate. "This is not cancer," he said. "It's a granuloma, a hard lump caused by an untreated infection. It looks like cancer, but it isn't." Sophia closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Marcus sat down. He didn't speak. He just stared at the floor. Dr. Mitchell explained everything. A granuloma like this is usually caused by a respiratory infection that the body tries to isolate. It wraps the infection in calcium, forming a solid mass. That's why the shape looked like a tumor on the scans. It presses on the trachea and causes trouble breathing, talking, and moving. But it doesn't spread like cancer. It doesn't destroy healthy cells. And most importantly, it can be removed. The treatment was clear: a simple endoscopic surgery to extract the granuloma, followed by antibiotics to make sure the infection didn't return. The recovery time was short, just a few weeks. Marcus looked up. His face showed disbelief and relief all at once. "So you're saying my son is not dying?" he asked. "No," the doctor answered. "He's not." Marcus finally broke down. He put his face in his hands and cried quietly. For months he had trusted experts, and all of them had been wrong. Sophia sat in silence, holding back her own tears. She didn't want to cry, not yet. She needed to stay focused. Dr. Mitchell showed them the scan side by side with the old one. The difference was clear. What 5 doctors had called terminal cancer was actually a removable lump. It was shocking. Marcus couldn't understand how this had happened. 5 doctors, he repeated. 5 experts. Not one of them saw this. Sophia looked at him, but didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was obvious now. The woman who cleaned the house and served breakfast had saved his son's life. Not because she was lucky, but because she had paid attention. Because she cared. Ethan would have died if no one had listened. Now he had a second chance. They scheduled the surgery for 2 days later. Until then, Ethan rested in a hospital room with new machines, new doctors, and real hope for the first time. The day of the surgery arrived. Ethan was nervous but calm. Sophia held his hand as they prepared him. Marcus stood nearby, watching everything closely. The medical team explained every step of the process. The surgery would be done through the throat using a small camera and tools. There would be no major cuts. It would take less than 2 hours. Once Ethan was taken to the operating room, Marcus and Sophia waited in a private room. They didn't speak much. The clock moved slowly. After 1 hour and 40 minutes, Dr. Mitchell walked in. "It's done," he said. "It went perfectly. The granuloma is out." "He's already waking up." Marcus covered his face with both hands shaking. Sophia sat still, her eyes wide. "He's going to be okay?" she asked. The doctor smiled. "Yes, very okay. They were allowed to see him soon after." Ethan was sleepy but awake. His eyes opened and he looked around slowly. When Ethan saw them, he smiled. A real full smile, the first in weeks. Then he spoke. His voice was clear. No gasping, no struggle. "Hi," he said. Sophia burst into tears. Marcus couldn't speak. He walked forward, knelt beside the bed and took Ethan's hand. The boy breathed deeply and said, "It doesn't hurt anymore." Marcus laughed through his tears. "It's over," he said. Sophia stood beside them, one hand on Ethan's shoulder, the other covering her mouth as she tried not to sob. All the fear, all the months of pain, the frustration, the rejection, it all led to this moment, a moment that proved they were right to keep fighting. Ethan wasn't dying. He was healing, and the woman they ignored, questioned and underestimated had been the one who made it possible. It wasn't a miracle, it was truth. It had been there all along, and now, finally, everyone could see it. The story leaked. It started with a small blog post by someone in the medical community who had heard about the case through a friend. The headline was simple but powerful. Billionaire's son misdiagnosed as terminal, saved by housekeeper. Within hours, it was picked up by a local news website. By the end of the day, it had spread to major newspapers and TV networks. Social media exploded. People were shocked that 5 highly respected doctors had failed to correctly diagnose a child's condition, and even more shocked that it was a housekeeper, not a doctor, who had spotted the mistake. Forums, podcasts, and health news programs were filled with people debating what had happened. Some defended the doctors, others criticized the system, but one thing was clear: the story had captured everyone's attention. It was no longer just about Ethan. It had become a national and soon international discussion about trust, power, and the limits of expertise. Within the week, the story had gone global. News anchors around the world repeated the same basic facts. A young boy, wrongly declared terminally ill, had been saved by the careful attention of the woman who took care of him daily. TV shows invited specialists to talk about how such a mistake could happen. Hashtags like "Listen to the Caregivers" and "Medical Humility" began trending. Sophia's name was everywhere. People started comparing her to whistleblowers and heroes who had saved lives despite having no formal authority. Journalists called non-stop asking for interviews. Her old neighborhood became crowded with reporters. Some people came just to take pictures of her former home. Universities offered her honorary degrees. NGOs wanted her to speak at events. Even health ministers from other countries asked to meet her, but Sophia stayed quiet. She ignored most messages and declined every interview. She didn't want attention. She didn't care about fame. She only wanted people to finally listen to those who care silently. Sophia made one public statement in public. She didn't read it in front of cameras or appear on any live show. Instead, she typed it and gave it to one trusted journalist. It was one sentence: "Nobody listens to those who serve, but the ones who care up close see what others refuse to see." That sentence was quoted in newspapers, printed on posters, and turned into a meme across the internet. People discussed its meaning in classrooms and boardrooms. Some used it to talk about social class. Others connected it to race or gender. But no matter the angle, everyone understood the message. People who work in the background, the ones who are often ignored, sometimes know more than the ones in charge. It wasn't just about Sophia anymore. It was about the nurse who notices something wrong, the janitor who hears things others don't, the assistant who pays attention when others overlook. Sophia had reminded the world of something important. Meanwhile, Marcus was dealing with his own emotions. He had believed every word the original doctors said. He followed every instruction. He didn't question their authority, and because of that he nearly lost his son. The guilt hit him hard. He felt like he had failed Ethan. He also realized how quickly he had dismissed Sophia's warnings at first. To make things right, he hired a team of investigators to look into the actions of the 5 doctors who had handled the case. He didn't care about the cost. He wanted the truth. The doctors, once confident and respected, now faced public scrutiny. Some tried to explain themselves. Others stayed silent. One even claimed it was a misunderstanding. But the evidence was strong. Marcus's team uncovered emails, medical reports, and appointment notes showing that the doctors had rushed the diagnosis and ignored signs that didn't match. It wasn't just a mistake. It was professional negligence, plain and simple. The official medical board reviewed everything. After weeks of analysis, they released a public report. It confirmed what Sophia and Dr. Mitchell already knew. The diagnosis had been wrong from the beginning. The doctors had followed a generic protocol based on incomplete data. They hadn't considered alternative explanations or performed deeper analysis. The board called it a case of systemic arrogance and failure to reassess. It also stated that Ethan's life had been put at serious risk because of professional overconfidence. Disciplinary actions were taken. Licenses were reviewed. Some doctors were suspended. Others were ordered to take retraining. The news of the board's ruling was covered widely. Marcus read every page of the report. For the first time in a long while, he felt like justice had been done. He still carried guilt, but he also knew he had taken action when it mattered. And now he was standing on the right side of the story, not just as a father, but as a man. Sophia didn't celebrate. She didn't want to. To her, the victory wasn't in the punishment of the doctors or the fame that followed. The real victory was Ethan alive, healing, and laughing again. She spent her days helping him with simple tasks, just like before, feeding him, helping with his exercises, playing board games, reading stories. The media eventually moved on to other topics, as they always do. But inside that house, everything had changed. Marcus gave her the respect she had always deserved. He asked for her opinion, listened to her, and made sure she was treated as part of the family. Ethan, now recovering faster each day, would often say, "She didn't just save my life, she believed in it." And for Sophia, that was enough. The world had turned upside down. Status, titles, and money had failed. Care, presence, and attention had saved the day. And this time, the world had finally seen it. Marcus made a decision that surprised many people. He created a new medical foundation in Ethan's name. Its mission was simple but powerful: to review terminal diagnosis, especially in children, and make sure no one else was sent home to die without real certainty. He named Sophia as the director. People in his circle questioned him. She wasn't a doctor. She had no formal degree, and she had never worked in an office before. But Marcus didn't care. He knew no one was better for the job. Sophia had proven she could see what others ignored. She understood the human side of medicine. Her job wasn't to give medical opinions, but to lead, to ask the right questions, and to make sure every case got the full attention it deserved. She accepted the role quietly. There was no big event, no red carpet. She just walked into the office, sat at the desk, and got to work. The story of Sophia and Ethan had already changed the medical world. After their case went public, hospitals across the country started offering diagnosis review programs. Families who had been told there was no hope now had a place to turn. Thousands of people began asking for second opinions, especially when something felt off. Medical boards started reviewing their internal protocols. Universities added new lectures on humility and diagnosis and the importance of patient observation. Sophia's name was often brought up in these discussions. She didn't attend these events. She preferred to stay with Ethan. That's where she felt useful, giving him his medicine, preparing his meals, helping with his schoolwork. She still watched him closely, even though he was now healthy. It was hard for her to forget the months when every breath had felt like it could be his last. But now, every day was a reminder that love, attention, and persistence could save lives. Ethan was no longer the quiet, tired boy who spent most of his days in bed. He was back to being a child full of energy, laughter, and curiosity. He ran through the garden, played soccer with his father, and asked hundreds of questions about everything. He loved animals and dreamed of becoming a vet. His body was strong again. His voice was loud and clear. He even returned to school and made new friends. Sophia picked him up every day and always packed his favorite snacks. Marcus watched all of this with quiet joy. He often stood at the window, smiling as Ethan played. The guilt from the past didn't disappear, but it changed. It became fuel. He wanted to do better. He wanted to make sure other parents didn't make the same mistakes he had. And more than anything, he wanted to support Sophia, who had not only saved his son's life, but also given it meaning again. Marcus and Sophia started spending more time together, not as boss and employee, but as partners in something deeper. He respected her in a way he never had before. They had long conversations about life, about mistakes, about family. Sophia shared stories about her daughter, and Marcus listened without interrupting. He told her how scared he had been during Ethan's worst moments, They understood each other. They both had experienced deep loss, and they both had fought against something bigger than themselves. Their connection grew slowly, naturally. There were no romantic promises or dramatic changes, just mutual care and trust. Marcus no longer saw Sophia as part of the staff. She was part of his family, and Ethan saw it too. He would sometimes hold both their hands and say, "We're a team, right?" They always answered, "Yes," because now everything had changed. The house that once felt dark and quiet was full of life again. Ethan, still young but now wiser than most kids his age, began writing letters, not emails, but real letters with colored pens and stickers. He sent them to other children who were in hospitals or going through difficult treatments. His message was always the same. Never believe only what the doctors say. Sometimes what you need is someone who really loves you and doesn't give up. These letters brought hope to children and their families. Some wrote back, others sent drawings. A few even said they asked for second opinions after reading Ethan's words. He felt proud knowing his story helped others. Sophia kept every reply in a box in his room. When Ethan had a tough day, she would open it and read one out loud. They called it their hope box. Ethan said that if one kid got saved because of his story, then all the pain had been worth it. And Sophia agreed with all her heart. Sophia had become more than a name in a newspaper headline. She was now a symbol. To some, she represented the voice of people who are usually ignored. To others, she proved that love and attention can sometimes see more than experience and education. And to Ethan, she was still mommy number 2, the one who had stayed, who had fought, and who had never let him give up. Marcus continued funding the foundation, but it was Sophia who ran it, shaped it, and gave it purpose. She didn't want fame or praise. She only wanted to make sure that no other child would be told to die without someone asking one more time, "Are we sure?" The story of Sophia and Ethan wasn't about luck. It was about timing, love, and courage. Two hearts, one fighting to survive, the other refusing to let go, met at the right moment. And together, they changed everything. The 5 doctors responsible for Ethan's misdiagnosis were summoned to an internal medical trial. The case had gained so much public attention that the medical board decided to act quickly. The investigation was long, with detailed reviews of medical files, interviews, and testimonies. Sophia was called to speak. She sat in front of a panel of professionals who once wouldn't have let her enter their office. This time they listened. She explained everything: what she saw, what she questioned, and how they treated her when she brought her concerns. One doctor tried to defend himself, saying the tumor looked real. But when the ultrasound footage and new test results were shown, his argument collapsed. In the end, the board made its decision. 3 of the doctors had their licenses suspended for multiple years. One, who ignored warning signs and refused to order further tests, was permanently banned from practicing medicine. They had failed to do their jobs. The 5th doctor, the one who had laughed at Sophia and told her she cleaned floors, faced more than a suspension. During the investigation, they uncovered other cases where he had ignored test results, altered documents, and rushed diagnosis to save time. One patient had even died from complications he failed to address. These discoveries shocked the board and the public. He wasn't just careless. He had committed medical fraud. Legal action was taken. He was arrested, charged, and later sentenced for negligence and falsifying medical records. His downfall became headline news. Articles referred to him as the man who mocked a housekeeper and failed a child. The Metropolitan Medical Center faced consequences too. The court ordered them to pay a large compensation to the family, not just for the misdiagnosis, but for emotional distress, mistreatment, and the danger Ethan had been exposed to. It was one of the biggest settlements in that hospital's history. The media had a field day. News sites published articles titled "The Blind Men in White Coats" and "How Arrogance Nearly Killed a Child." Talk shows debated the role of power, class, and responsibility in medicine. People began to question the automatic trust often placed in medical professionals without second thought. Discussions about second opinions, patient rights, and the importance of listening to caregivers became common. For many, this was a wake-up call. Sophia, who once had no voice in those halls, became a symbol of accountability. She didn't ask for revenge, and she never once celebrated the doctor's punishment. Her only concern was that no other child would suffer because of someone's refusal to listen. When asked how she felt seeing the doctors punished, she simply said, "I hope they learn something." To her, justice wasn't about punishment. It was about change. And now change was happening slowly, but for the first time publicly and clearly. Sophia received a letter from a global health organization inviting her to a forum on medical ethics and human care. She didn't know what to expect. She was not a doctor. She had no degree. But she accepted the invitation because the message was bigger than her title. At the event, surrounded by professionals from around the world, she stepped onto the stage. She was nervous but calm. She told the story from the beginning. Ethan, the misdiagnosis, the ultrasound, the silence, and the fight to be heard. Everyone listened. At the end of her speech, she said something that would be remembered long after. Listen to what is not on paper. Look at what tests don't show. And never underestimate someone who truly loves. The room stood in silence, then burst into applause. Her words were quoted in international newspapers, printed in journals, and shared in classrooms. That one sentence became part of modern medical ethics discussions everywhere. Sophia was later awarded an international prize for humanitarian impact in medicine. It was the first time the award had been given to someone who wasn't a medical professional. The organization said she reminded the world that medicine isn't only about science, it's about people. Her story became a case study in medical schools. Students read about how she noticed what trained professionals had missed, how she was ignored, and how she kept going. She received hundreds of letters from nurses, caregivers, and parents thanking her for showing the world that attention and love matter. Some said they now felt braver to speak up. Others said they were finally being taken seriously. Sophia didn't change her life much. She still worked with the foundation, helped Ethan with school, and lived simply. But the world around her had changed. She was no longer invisible. She was now part of the story, a story that had reached millions. For the first time, justice didn't come from the top. It came from someone who had spent most of her life in the background. Sophia had been ignored, doubted, and even mocked, not because she was wrong, but because of who she was. And yet, she had saved a life and sparked a global conversation. Her story proved that sometimes the truth is seen not by the experts, but by the ones who are present every day, who notice the small things, who care deeply. Ethan's life was saved not just by medical tools or technology, but by the unshakable will of someone who refused to stay quiet. And now that voice, once dismissed, had helped change the world. In classrooms, hospitals, and homes, people began to repeat her words. They weren't fancy or complicated. They were simple, like Sophia. Listen to what's not on paper. Look beyond the test, and never ignore true love. 5 years had passed since that rainy afternoon when everything changed. The Blackwood estate looked different now. Where once there had been quiet hallways and whispered conversations, there was now constant activity. The foundation had grown beyond anything Marcus had imagined when he first created it. What started as a single office had expanded into a multi-building complex, complete with research labs, consultation rooms, and a residential facility for families traveling from far distances. Sophia walked through the main building, reviewing case files that had arrived that morning. Each folder represented a family somewhere in the world who had been told there was no hope. Each one was a story waiting to be rewritten, just like Ethan's had been. The foundation now employed over 200 people, doctors, researchers, case managers, and support staff, all working under Sophia's guidance to ensure that no diagnosis went unquestioned, no case went unreviewed. The walls were lined with thank you letters, children's drawings, and photos from families whose lives had been saved by the Foundation's intervention. But Sophia's favorite display was a simple framed ultrasound image, the very first one she had taken of Ethan 5 years ago. It served as a reminder of how small observations could lead to life-changing discoveries. Ethan, now 12 years old, burst through the foundation's front doors. His school backpack slung over his shoulder. He had grown tall and strong, his cheeks filled with color, his eyes bright with the energy of a healthy, happy child. Every day after school, he would come to the foundation to do his homework in Sophia's office, just as he had done for the past 3 years. "Sophia," he called out, using the name he had always called her, though the rest of the world now knew her as Director Martinez. "Guess what happened at school today?" She smiled, setting down her files. Ethan's daily stories had become one of her greatest joys. He would tell her about his friends, his classes, his dreams of becoming a veterinarian, and his plans to work alongside her at the foundation when he was older. "Tell me everything," she said, pulling out a chair for him at the small table in her office where he always did his homework. "Mrs. Johnson, my science teacher, she told the whole class about our foundation today. She said I was lucky to have someone like you in my life." Ethan's voice carried a mixture of pride and gratitude that never failed to move Sophia. "And then Tommy Peterson. You know, the kid whose mom works at the hospital? He said his mom tells all the new doctors about you, about how they should always listen to everyone, not just other doctors." Sophia felt her chest tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, even with all the recognition and awards, hearing that the message was still spreading, still making a difference, filled her with the same hope she had felt that first day when Dr. Harris confirmed her suspicions. Marcus appeared in the doorway, having finished his afternoon board meeting. At 45, he looked younger than he had 5 years ago. The constant stress and worry lines had been replaced by smile lines and the confidence of a man who had found his true purpose. The foundation had become his life's work, and watching Sophia lead it with such grace and effectiveness filled him with pride every single day. "How did the Peterson case review go?" Sophia asked, referring to a 13-year-old girl from Ohio whose parents had brought her to the foundation after being told she had 6 months to live. "Dr. Chen thinks you're right again," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "The biopsy results came back this morning. It's not sarcoma like they thought. It's a rare inflammatory condition, completely treatable with the right medication protocol." Sophia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Another life saved, another family that wouldn't have to say goodbye. In 5 years, the foundation had reviewed over 3,000 cases. Of those, nearly 40% had resulted in revised diagnoses. 40%. That meant over 1,200 children who had been sent home to die were now living, thriving, growing up because someone had taken the time to look again. "That's the 15th case this month," Ethan said, looking up from his math homework. At 12, he had become remarkably knowledgeable about the foundation's work. He kept track of the statistics, celebrated each success, and understood the weight of what they were doing. "Sophia, do you think there will ever be a day when no doctors make mistakes?" Sophia considered the question carefully. She had learned not to give Ethan simple answers to complex questions. "I don't think the goal is for doctors to never make mistakes, sweetheart. Everyone makes mistakes. The goal is to create a system where it's safe to question, safe to ask for another opinion, and safe to admit when we're not sure. The goal is to remember that behind every diagnosis is a person, a family, a story that matters." The phone on Sophia's desk rang, and her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Sophia, Dr. Mitchell is on line 3. He says it's about the conference next month." Dr. Mitchell had become not just a colleague but a close friend over the years. He served on the Foundation's advisory board and had been instrumental in helping them establish protocols for case review. The conference he was calling about was the annual International Symposium on Diagnostic Humility, an event the Foundation hosted every year that brought together medical professionals from around the world to discuss cases, share experiences, and learn from diagnostic errors. "Tell him I'll call him back in an hour," Sophia said. "I want to finish going through these new case files first." As Sophia returned to her work, Ethan continued with his homework, and Marcus reviewed foundation business. The office fell into a comfortable rhythm. This had become their routine, their family dynamic that had evolved naturally over the years. Marcus had never remarried, and Sophia had never sought another relationship. They had found in each other and in Ethan a completeness that didn't require traditional labels or definitions. Their bond was built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the unshakable knowledge that they had faced the impossible together and won. Marcus often said that Sophia hadn't just saved Ethan's life, she had saved his soul. And Sophia would respond that Marcus and Ethan had given her a reason to use the pain of losing Isabella for something meaningful. "Sophia," Ethan said, looking up from his homework again, "when I grow up and become a doctor, will you teach me how to really see patients the way you do?" She reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan, you already see people the way I do. You have your father's compassion and something extra, something that comes from understanding what it means to fight for your life. When you become a doctor, you'll be the kind who listens not just with medical knowledge, but with heart." Marcus watched this exchange with the same awe he felt every day. Sophia had not only saved Ethan's physical life, but had shaped him into a young man who understood the value of every breath, every day, every opportunity to help others. Ethan wasn't just surviving, he was thriving with a depth of purpose that most adults never found. The Foundation's latest newsletter lay open on Sophia's desk, featuring a story about an 8-year-old boy in Germany whose parents had contacted them after watching a documentary about Ethan's case. The boy had been diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor, but the Foundation's review had revealed it was actually a cystic lesion that could be drained with a simple procedure. He was now cancer-free and back in school. Stories like this arrived weekly. A girl in Japan whose terminal leukemia turned out to be a treatable autoimmune disorder. Twins in Brazil whose genetic degenerative disease was actually a vitamin deficiency that could be corrected with supplements. A teenager in South Africa whose incurable neurological condition was a rare but treatable metabolic disorder. Each case reinforced what Sophia had learned that rainy afternoon 5 years ago. The human body is complex. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving. And sometimes the most important diagnostic tool is someone who refuses to accept impossible as an answer. "I got a letter today from Jessica," Sophia mentioned to Marcus, referring to a 16-year-old girl whose case they had reviewed 2 years earlier. "She starts college next month. Pre-med. She wants to specialize in pediatric oncology." Marcus smiled. "How many is that now? Former patients who've gone into medicine?" 23 that we know of," Sophia replied. "And Ethan isn't even old. Enough for college yet." They had started, calling them Sophia's Army, young people who had been saved by the Foundation's work and who were now dedicating their lives to medicine, inspired by the woman who had refused to let them die. Medical schools across the country were reporting an increase in applications that specifically mentioned wanting to practice diagnostic humility and patient-centered care. The ripple effects of that one case, that one housekeeper who refused to stay silent, continued to spread in ways none of them could have predicted. Medical curricula had been revised. Hospital policies had been changed. Patient advocacy groups had been formed. But perhaps most importantly, the conversation about who gets listened to in medicine had fundamentally shifted. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows through the Foundation's windows, Sophia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about Isabella, her daughter who had died because no one would listen to a worried mother. She thought about the 5 doctors who had been so certain of their diagnosis that they couldn't see beyond their own expertise. She thought about Dr. Harris, who had validated her instincts and given her the confidence to keep fighting. And she thought about Dr. Mitchell, who had shown them that somewhere in the medical world There were still people who valued questions over answers, but mostly she thought about Ethan, running through the garden outside her window, alive and healthy and full of dreams. Every day with him was a gift, a reminder that persistence and love and refusing to accept the unacceptable could literally change the world. The foundation had grown beyond saving individual lives. It had become a movement, a symbol of what was possible when people refused to be silenced by authority, when they trusted their instincts, when they fought for those they loved with everything they had. "Sophia," Marcus said, breaking into her thoughts, "I've been thinking about something." She looked up from her files. "What's that?" "I think it's time we started planning for the future. Not just the Foundation's future, but our future. Ethan's future." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know we've never talked about making this official, about becoming a real family in the traditional sense. But I want you to know that in every way that matters, you already are family. You're not just Ethan's second mom, you're my partner in every sense of the word." Sophia felt her eyes fill with tears. Over the years, she and Marcus had grown closer, their relationship evolving from employer and employee to colleagues to friends, to something deeper and more meaningful than either had words for. They had never needed to define it, never felt pressure to make it official. But hearing him say it out loud, acknowledging what they had built together, felt like coming home. "Marcus," she said softly, 5 years ago, I thought my purpose was to save one little boy. I never imagined that saving him would save me too, would give me a new family, a new purpose, a new life." Ethan looked up from his homework, having overheard their conversation. "Does this mean you're going to officially adopt me?" he asked with a grin. "Because I've been telling everyone at school that Sophia is my mom anyway." They all laughed, the sound filling the office with warmth and joy. Outside, the sun set completely, but inside the Foundation, the lights stayed on. There was always more work to do, more cases to review, more lives to save. As they gathered their things to head home for dinner, Sophia took one last look at the ultrasound image on her wall. 5 years ago, that grainy black-and-white photo had seemed like such a small thing, just another routine check with a portable machine. But it had changed everything. It had saved Ethan, transformed Marcus, given Sophia a new purpose, and started a global movement toward more humble, more human medicine. Sometimes the most important moments in history begin with the smallest actions. A housekeeper asking questions, a worried caregiver refusing to be silent, a family choosing to fight when everyone else has given up. And sometimes those small actions echo through time, changing not just one life, but thousands of lives, creating a legacy that will continue long after the people who started it are gone. As they walked out of the Foundation together, Ethan between Sophia and Marcus, holding both their hands, Sophia realized that this was what victory looked like. Not fame or recognition or awards, but a 12-year-old boy who should have died 5 years ago, walking home with his family, dreaming about his future, carrying within him the knowledge that love and persistence and refusing to give up can literally move mountains. The story that had begun with a question, "Am I going to live, Mommy?" had become an answer that would echo through generations. "Yes, my love, and so will countless others, because you taught us never to stop fighting." Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.